Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the Capitol relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. You remember the white rose? Perfect. Fragrant. A calling card that says, "The Capitol is watching you," but then you picture something else. A grey schedule board in District 13. No scent. No beauty, just rows of numbers and tasks telling every person exactly where to be every minute of the day. So which one should actually scare you more? The obvious threat that smells like blood and perfume, or the quiet wall that organizes an entire district's life down to the half hour? At face value, the answer feels easy. The Capitol is the villain. It broadcasts the Hunger Games, turns children into entertainment, and decorates its streets with the trauma of the districts. You see Snow's roses, the victors' interviews, the parade of costumes, and you think, there it is, the heart of evil. The Capitol is decadent, cruel, obsessed with the games. District 13, by contrast, shows up waving the flag of rebellion, freedom fighters in a bunker, so your brain files them under good side almost automatically. But here's the real question. If the Capitol is so obviously monstrous, how did a place like District 13 convince everyone it was the moral upgrade? How does a nuclear-armed underground society with mandatory schedules and public punishments sell itself as the better option? There is a lot to uncover here, because the answer doesn't start with a rose. It starts with that grey board. District 13 fights the Capitol's oppression using methods that feel disturbingly familiar. The Capitol surveils you with cameras in the arena. 13 surveils you with those schedule boards and ever-present guards. The Capitol uses propaganda segments with Caesar Flickerman. 13 uses proper shoots with Katniss, Peeta, and Finnick, editing their pain into strategic messaging. The Capitol treats tributes as expendable lives for spectacle. 13 treats soldiers, and even victors, as expendable for strategy. So what's the real difference in that relationship of power? This is where we talk about danger that doesn't look theatrical. Snow's cruelty is loud. Coin's control is quiet. The Capitol kills for spectacle, to remind you that hope is a joke. District 13 kills for efficiency, to prove that hope is a weapon they own. Which one lasts longer? Which one is harder to notice until it's already permanent? When Coin can propose a symbolic final Hunger Games using Capitol children and still keep her image as the reasonable leader, something has gone very wrong. By the end of this breakdown, we're going to cover why a bunker full of disciplined freedom fighters might be more dangerous long-term than a city of cartoonish villains. Why a rose at least tells you it's a warning, but a schedule board pretends it's just helping you survive. And why the real horror of Panem isn't just that the games exist, but that both sides keep finding new ways to play them. From roses to rations, why this question actually matters. On the surface, The capital and District 13 feel like opposite worlds. In the capital, everything is turned up to 11. Neon hair, gold eyeliner, dogs dyed blue just because someone got bored. Tables collapsing under feasts that could feed an entire district for a week. At face value, that excess makes the evil easy to spot. You look at a party where people drink to throw up so they can eat more, and the moral verdict kind of writes itself. District 13 is the photo negative of that image. Grey concrete, grey jumpsuits, grey food paste you're supposed to be grateful for. You stand in a ration line instead of a couture line. Your day isn't a chaotic pleasure parade. It's carved into rigid blocks on a schedule board that tells you when to wake up, when to work, when to shower, when to sleep. That part matters because it feels reasonable at first. You're in a bunker, there's a war. Of course things are strict. But here's the real question. When the feathers and fireworks are stripped away, are you actually freer in 13 than you were under the capital's shadow? Or did the games just move indoors? The story doesn't end when the arena force field drops or the broadcasts cut off. Any victor will tell you the games don't end when you win, and Panem shows us the war doesn't end when snow falls. Winning the war doesn't magically mean winning freedom. It can just swap one system of control for another, one that promises survival instead of style. So why does Katniss, who walked through the heart of the capital, say she feels more watched in 13 than she ever did there? Why is every step she takes assigned, logged, evaluated? Why does Peeta's suffering not stop once he's rescued, but simply get repackaged as a security risk and then a propaganda tool? Why does Prim, the entire reason Katniss volunteered in the first place, die after the supposed good guys are in charge? There is a lot to uncover here. District 13 isn't just a cool lore reveal about a secret underground district. This is where we talk about what revolutions actually do with power once they get it. 13 becomes a test case for a bigger idea. You can overthrow a capital, repaint the walls, change the speeches, and still keep the same basic relationship between ruler and ruled. Same cage, different branding, and that's where the warning hits us. If we read District 13 as purely heroic, we miss what Suzanne Collins is doing. She's not only asking whether Snow is a monster, she's asking why we're so quick to trust anyone who promises hope as long as they're standing on the opposite podium. Because if we can't tell the difference between freedom and a better organized prison, we're going to cheer for the next coin in our own world too. So how does 13 actually rebuild the games without calling them games? That's what we're going to cover next. Our angle, District 13 as the better Hunger Games, you didn't notice. So when we say District 13 rebuilds the games, we're not just being poetic. We're making a very specific claim about power. The capital kills for spectacle. District 13 is willing to kill for strategy. And here's the real question. Which one is actually harder to escape from in the long run? Because spectacle burns out. Bread and circuses get expensive. A regime that needs constant fireworks has to keep topping itself. But a system that kills for efficiency, that can run forever on rations, schedules, and a spreadsheet. That part matters because it means 13's version of control is colder, cheaper, and much easier to mistake for justice. So this is where we talk about our angle. At face value, 13 is the heroic underground district that survived the nukes and waited to liberate everyone else. You're told it's about safety, equality, and rebellion. No more Hunger Games, No more snow, no more capital decadence. But we're going to cover 3 layers under that promise: the structure of 13, the psychology it creates, and the politics it hands to Coin. Structurally, 13 doesn't need a victor's village, because the entire district is already built as a weapon. Every hallway, every schedule board, every grey uniform says the same thing: you are a component. In the capital, only a few victors become tools of the state. In 13, everyone is already slotted into a role, from Katniss's assigned training blocks to the exact minute you eat breakfast. You don't need a separate suburb to reward obedience when the whole society is one big barracks. Psychologically, that's even more dangerous. The capital distracts you with color and excess. 13 narrows your world until duty is the only color left. You're not choosing to fight. You're scheduled to. Katniss is the mockingjay on Coin's timetable. Peeta isn't a person recovering from torture. He's an asset quarantined and evaluated until his hijacking can be turned into either a cautionary tale or a weapon on command. There is a lot to uncover here about how quickly survival talk becomes obedience training. And politically, all of that funnels upward into Coin. The relationship between her and Katniss mirrors Snow and his victors, but with a twist. Snow bribes and threatens in full view. Coin withholds information and wraps every move in the language of unity. She can authorize the bombing that kills Prim, then propose a symbolic final Hunger Games for capital children, and still sell it as justice, not cruelty. So when the victors sit in that room and vote on another games, we're not just watching revenge, we're watching how easily 13's system can reboot Snow's rules with new branding. The war ends, but the logic of the arena doesn't. In the next section, we'll dig into how specific moments, Prim's death, Peeta's imprisonment, even that final vote, reveal just how close Panem came to trading one president for another and calling it freedom. Tonight's game plan: how we're taking District 13 apart. So here's how we're going to pull District 13 apart tonight. We're not just asking whether Coin is bad or Snow is worse. We're mapping out the whole system that turns a buried bunker into something that can rival the capital's arena. First, we're going back to the beginning. District 13 doesn't start as a rebellion HQ. It starts as a nuclear-armed insurance policy. This is where we talk about the origin story, the secret deal, the underground bunkers, the decision to survive by disappearing. At face value, that sounds smart. Your district is nuked. You go underground, you wait. But here's the real question. What does that do to a society when every day is structured around the fear of annihilation? From there, we're going to cover daily life in 13, because the schedule boards are basically their own character. Every minute assigned, every calorie tracked, every citizen monitored. You think the capital is invasive with cameras in the games? In 13, the surveillance is quieter, but it's everywhere. That part matters because it shows you the trade, no glitter, no parties, but also no freedom to simply exist without justification. Once we've set that baseline, we move to Coin herself and her relationship to Snow. This is not just a simple good president versus bad president comparison. We're going to line up their choices. Snow uses the games and spectacle. Coin uses secrecy and necessary casualties. Snow kills for entertainment. Coin kills for strategy. So why does that feel, in some ways, more chilling? We'll use Prim's death, Boggs's warnings, and Plutarch's smug little hints to track how easily 13 could slide into its own dictatorship. Then, pattern interrupt. We're pausing the analysis to talk about propaganda as the new arena. No, there isn't a physical stadium in 13. But the propos, the carefully staged rescues, the way Katniss is costumed, scripted, and deployed. That's 13's version of the games. We'll break down how the Capitol uses victors on TV, then show how 13 repackages that same logic and calls it hope instead of horror. We'll also have a dedicated book versus movie segment because the adaptation choices are doing a lot of stealth work. On screen, 13 is clean, grey, organised, a safe if boring bunker. In the books, the same corridors and schedules are quietly screaming authoritarian regime. Why does the film language tell you to relax in a place where the text is warning you to stay tense? Near the end, we'll zoom out into speculative world building. If Coin had lived, what happens next? Do we get a one-time Hunger Games for capital children that mysteriously becomes a tradition? Or something even more clinical, where punishment and public executions replace spectacle but keep the same message? The capital rules, the districts obey. And finally, we'll land on that last Hunger Games vote and Katniss's decision to kill Coin. We'll treat it as a verdict on which system is more dangerous and why. Then we'll turn it over to you with a simple, awful question. If you had to choose, would you live in the Capitol or in 13? And what's your reason for that choice? If you think this is just Capitol bad, welcome to the bunker. And if you're hearing that and thinking, okay, so this is just another Capitol bad, Rebels good breakdown, hold up. That's the surface read. At face value, Panem gives you a clean moral map, glittering tyrants up top, starving districts below, heroic bunker people waiting to save the day. But here's the real question. What happens when you stop treating this as a YA backdrop and start treating Panem as an actual political system that has to function day to day? That's what we're going to cover on this channel, over and over. We zoom in on the machinery. Why does a district survive nukes? Why does a victor matter more as a symbol than as a person? What's the relationship between a speech, a bombing, and a vote? Years later, if you just wandered in from a Hunger Games rewatch, or you got ambushed by a Katniss and Peeta TikTok edit at 2 a.m., welcome to the bunker in a different sense. This is where we talk about the parts the movies glance at and then sprint past. The schedule boards in 13, the bombing of the nut, the way a single quarter quell announcement rewires hope across every district. There is a lot to uncover here. We treat Victor's Village, the Capitol, and District 13 as institutions with goals, not just sets. That part matters because once you see the reason behind a choice, Snow's roses, Coin's speeches, Plutarch's accidents, you can't unsee how strategic the cruelty really is. You start asking, was that mercy or was that messaging? Was that survival or was that social engineering? So if you want more, then Team Peeta versus Team Gale. This is your place. When you enlist here, you're not signing up for Coin's propaganda machine. You're enlisting in our own little Victor's Village, a community of people who remember that the games don't end when the cannon fires. Subscribing means more deep dives into districts, victors, and the politics behind key scenes. The nut collapsing on its own workers, The third quarter quell tearing the promise of safety out from under the winners. The final vote for one last Hunger Games. We're going to cover why District 13's rigid schedules feel so different from the capital's excess, but end up serving a similar purpose. Why a nuclear-armed bunker that promises freedom might quietly be building its own version of the games. And why Coin keeping Peeta locked away, weaponizing his hijacking, is not a glitch in the rebellion. It's the system working as intended. Because to understand why District 13 is more dangerous than the capital, you have to start with how it survived in the first place. The history. The nukes. The deal that turned a district into a buried state. Once you see that origin story clearly, the rest of Coin's choices stop being surprises and start looking inevitable. And that's where we're heading next. Before the bunker, what District 13 was before it went underground? So when you picture District 13 before the bunkers, what do you see? A normal district with mines and grey buildings, or the skeleton of a hidden country that's already planning for the end of the world? At face value, the old maps tell you 13 was about graphite. Pencil stuff, industrial, boring, safely unglamorous compared to the capital's neon excess. But here's the real question. Why would the capital care so much about a district that just ships carbon blocks? The answer is that graphite is also what you need for nuclear reactors. And buried under that official job description, 13's real assignment was weapons. Reactors, warheads, the kind of power that doesn't just light up a city, it erases one. So by the time the first rebellion breaks out, the relationship between the capital and 13 is already different from every other district. Everyone else is chained to the games through food, labor, and fear. 13 is chained through mutually assured destruction. If they go down, they're taking the capital with them. That part matters because it explains why Snow's predecessors don't simply glass the whole region and move on. We're going to cover the rebellion more in a second, but stay with this moment. The war is going badly. Districts are rising. The capital is used to having all the leverage. And suddenly, there's this one district that can answer every bombing run with a nuclear strike. So what do you do when your own weapons program turns into a potential victor in the worst possible game? Who can end Panem first? You negotiate, or at least you fake it well enough to survive. This is where we talk about the deal. The capital levels the surface of 13 on camera. Rubble, smoke, silence. The official story becomes, they're gone. Rebellion equals extinction. But off-screen, the bargain is brutal and simple. The capital agrees not to hunt the bunkers. 13 agrees to vanish. No open challenge. No more uprisings. No second rebellion from their soil. In exchange for not being annihilated, they accept something almost as extreme, permanent burial, and that's the cost of survival. 13 trades land and sky for concrete and steel, sunlight for fluorescent bulbs, farms for hydroponics and nutrient paste. You go from having a district to having a silo. Every hallway is a reminder that you're still technically at war, even in peacetime. Here's the real question. What does that do to a society over decades? When every meal is rationed, every minute on the schedule boards is accounted for, you don't raise citizens, you raise assets. The promise isn't happiness, it's endurance. There is a lot to uncover here, but the core is simple. When your entire existence depends on staying ready to fire nukes again, You build a culture that treats people the way it treats missiles: precise, controlled, and never fully safe to question. And once you understand that origin, Coin's brand of order stops feeling sudden. It's just the surface expression of a world that's been underground, armed, and waiting for decades. 13's founding myth: survival at any price. So once you have a society that's been underground, armed, and waiting for decades, you need a story to explain why it has to stay that way. This is where we talk about 13's founding myth. Picture the early bunker years. You're crammed in concrete corridors with thousands of other people, air that always smells filtered, food that's measured down to the calorie, no sky, no seasons, just walls, schedules, and the distant memory of trees you're not sure you really remember anymore. Back then, survival wasn't an abstract value. It was a daily math problem. How many potatoes? How many pills? How many people? And here's the real question: what does that do to your brain when the ceiling is the closest thing you have to a horizon? You start to equate freedom with risk, spontaneity with death. The games are happening overhead, but underground, your entire world is a bunker that only works if nobody steps out of line. Leadership in 13 leans into that. At face value, their story is heroic. We did what the other districts couldn't. We beat the capital, we took their nukes, we took their hit, and we're still here. But that part matters because it quietly adds a second sentence. We survived because we were harder, stricter, more disciplined than anyone else. Once you accept that, any cruelty can be rebranded as caution. So we're going to cover how that myth turns into policy. The strict schedules posted on the walls aren't just about efficiency. They're a daily sermon. Every blinking board tells you if you're not exactly where you're assigned, you are endangering all of us. Mandatory work assignments become a moral test. Rationing isn't just logistics, it's proof you're willing to sacrifice. Zero tolerance for dissent, that's not tyranny. That's preventing panic in a population that still believes one wrong move could trigger annihilation. Now compare that to the Capitol's origin story. The Capitol says, "We ended the dark days, we brought order through fear and spectacle." The games keep the peace. Their promise is that terror and entertainment will stop another war. 13's promise is that sacrifice and unity will stop another extinction. Different costumes, different aesthetics, same core relationship to power. Order first, people second. So which is worse? A capital that kills for spectacle, or a district that's willing to erase individuality in the name of survival? There is a lot to uncover here, because once you see the parallel, Coin and Snow stop being opposites and start looking like mirror images with different branding. And here's the real question 13 never asks itself. If your government is born in a bunker under threat of annihilation, can it ever stop acting like it's at war, even when the war is supposedly over? Or does it quietly start searching for a new enemy to justify staying in charge? Maybe even one wearing a Mockingjay pin. Enter Alma Coin, the woman who turned survival into a system. So if District 13 is always hunting for a new enemy, who designs the hunt? Enter Alma Coin. On paper, she's the success story of the rebellion. President of 13 for years, the woman who kept a supposedly dead district alive under the Capitol's nose, who managed nuclear weapons, food shortages, and constant threat without the whole bunker turning on itself. At face value, That sounds heroic. You don't survive decades of siege without serious competence. But here's the real question. What kind of person do you have to become to run a society that way for that long? Coin's public persona answers that before she ever opens her mouth. Where Snow is roses, blood and theatrical menace, Coin is grey. Grey hair, grey suits, grey walls behind her. Her speeches are calm, rational, almost soothing. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. The system does the shouting for her. Those schedule boards in the center of 13, assigning every minute of every day. That's her version of Snow's roses, a constant visual reminder of who earns your time, your labor, your survival. This is where we talk about the founding myth of 13, because that part matters because it's her favorite weapon. The story is always the same. We sacrificed. We went underground. We endured so you could have a future. Coin repeats unity and sacrifice the way the Capitol repeats luxury and spectacle. When Katniss questions the strictness of the rules, the answer is already preloaded. Do you want to end up like the surface? Do you want the Capitol to win? It's brilliant in a very cold way. Snow keeps control by promising pleasure. Coin keeps control by promising survival. One sells hope as comfort, the other sells hope as endurance. Different packaging, same relationship. You obey or you lose everything. Notice how subtle she is compared to Snow. Snow sends bleeding roses to terrify Katniss. Coin sends carefully crafted speeches, controlled votes, and staged assemblies. When Peeta is rescued but hijacked, she doesn't rant or rave. She quietly keeps him contained, weaponizes his condition as both a warning and a potential asset. When she lets Katniss see him too early, is that a mistake or a calculated way to break the Mockingjay a little more? Here's the pattern interrupt. Coin is not impressive because of her military strategy. Plutarch and Boggs handle a lot of that. Her real genius is social engineering. She knows which images to broadcast, which words to repeat, when to offer a vote that feels democratic, but is framed so heavily the outcome barely matters. That's why the proposal for a symbolic final Hunger Games using Capitol children is so chilling. She doesn't flinch at repeating Snow's cruelty. She just rebrands it as justice. So why does that make her more dangerous than she looks? Because a dictator who knows he's a villain is one thing. A leader who can convince an entire district that perpetual austerity, controlled rage, and recycled games are the price of freedom, that's someone who can survive the war and still keep everyone marching in step. And the real question hanging over the end of the story is simple. If Katniss hadn't intervened, would Panem have escaped the games, or just changed who was drawing the names? Life by the schedule board, how District 13 controls every minute. And District 13's answer to that question isn't a new arena. It's a wall of glowing schedule boards that runs your entire life. At face value, the system looks efficient, almost comforting. Every citizen in 13 has a daily grid, color-coded blocks for work, meals, sleep, even recreation and personal hygiene. You don't just know where you're supposed to be, you know where everyone is supposed to be at every minute. No gaps, no drift, no wandering. But here's the real question. What happens to a rebellion when there is literally no unscheduled time? This is where we talk about psychological control. When your hours are pre-allocated from wake up to lights out, your capacity to organize, to dissent, or even to daydream shrinks. You can't spontaneously meet in an empty hallway if there is no such thing as an empty hallway. You can't accidentally skip a shift if every absence pings the system. The relationship between the citizen and the state stops being negotiated. It's printed on the wall every morning. Katniss feels this immediately. She goes from hunting in forbidden woods, choosing her own routes and rhythms, to standing in line waiting for her slot on the board. Training, propose, medical, sleep, repeat. There is a lot to uncover here, because even someone who has survived 2 Hunger Games, someone who has literally outwitted the Capitol, is worn down by something as boring as a timetable. That part matters because it tells you how powerful structure can be as a weapon. Now compare that to the Capitol. Up there, the elites have the opposite problem. Too much freedom. Their days are a blur of parties, surgeries, and betting on the games. It's chaos disguised as luxury. They're distracted into obedience. District 13 flips the strategy. No excess, no spontaneity, just constant productive motion. The Capitol controls you by offering infinite choices that don't matter. 13 controls you by removing almost every choice that does. So why is this more dangerous than the arena itself? The games terrorize 24 children at a time, while the rest of Panem watches. The schedule boards discipline everyone, every day, without a single cannon firing. You don't need peacekeepers dragging people away when the wall quietly tattles on anyone out of place. The punishment is baked into the routine. And here's the real question for a so-called free Panem. If your mornings, afternoons, and evenings all belong to the state, what exactly is left that's yours? Because once you see the boards as a softer version of a countdown clock, you start to realize District 13 didn't abolish the games. It just turned time itself into the arena. And Coin isn't done yet. If she can choreograph every minute of her own district, what happens when she gets her hands on Capitol cameras, hijacked victors, and a war that plays out live? Rations, uniforms, and the death of individuality. So if time is the new arena, what are you actually fighting for in District 13? Not food, not fashion, not even privacy. You're fighting for the right to be a person in a place that keeps insisting you're a role. This is where we talk about the grey jumpsuits. At face value, they're practical, durable, identical, no wasted fabric, no wasted dye. You wake up, check the schedule board, pull on the same shapeless outfit as everyone else, and head to your assigned station. Add in the buzzed haircuts, and suddenly the district looks less like a community and more like a single organism, made of interchangeable parts. No class markers, no style, no way to signal who you are beyond your unit number. But here's the real question. If the Capitol controls people by exaggerating difference, outrageous wigs, gold eyeliner, skin dyed any color you want, what does it mean that 13 controls people by erasing it? In the Capitol, your appearance is a performance the system rewards. In 13, any deviation from the uniform is suspicious. Both extremes are about obedience, just with different costumes. You don't choose meals, you're issued rations. Strict portions, no seconds, no indulgence. Every calorie is accounted for, justified by labor and necessity. If you want more, the answer isn't work hard and buy it, the way the Capitol pretends. It's there is no more. You don't complain about being hungry, because that would mean you don't respect the sacrifice that kept the district alive. That part matters because it turns basic needs into a loyalty test. Why would you question Coin's decisions if questioning them sounds identical to endangering everyone's survival? When the only dessert is the promise of victory against the capital, who wants to be the person saying, "Actually, can we talk about haircuts?" The Mockingjay armor, the wings, even the simple black combat outfit Cinna designed, every piece is a direct violation of 13's aesthetic. It's tailored, symbolic. It says I in a place that only wants we. Coin doesn't crush it though. She quarantines it into propaganda. As long as the costume serves the war, as long as the Mockingjay stays on screen and under control, the rules can bend. The moment Katniss tries to act on her own, refusing scripted lines, demanding Peeta's rescue, that same individuality is suddenly dangerous. So why is this more terrifying than the Capitol's neon horror show? Because Snow's world makes the villain obvious. You can point at the games, at the victors paraded through the districts, and say, that's wrong. In 13, the control hides inside routines and rations and reasonable-sounding rules. It's just the way things are after a war, and when control feels natural, how do you even realize it's something you're supposed to resist? Hold on to that, because the next step is even colder. What happens when Coin stops just managing bodies and starts managing symbols, victors and trauma the way Snow managed the arena? Punishment in the shadows. What happens when you step out of line? So if control in District 13 hides inside routines, what happens when you break the routine? This is where we talk about punishment. At face value, 13 doesn't have the Capitol's whippings on the square or televised executions. There's no Seneca Crane-style spectacle, no game-style arena to make an example out of you. That almost feels safer. But here's the real question. If a system doesn't need public blood to keep you in line, what is it doing instead? In 13, the answer is quiet. Confinement, demotion, vanished privileges. You don't get dragged in front of the district. You get erased from it. Confinement sounds almost reasonable, right? You picture a timeout, maybe a cell. In practice, it's social death. You're pulled off the schedule boards, sealed away, no work, no community, no purpose. In a world where your identity is your assigned task, having no task is its own kind of violence. There is a lot to uncover here, because that part matters. Public pain, the Capitol style, is designed to scare you through other people's bodies. Hidden pain 13 style is designed to make you fear becoming invisible. One says, "We can kill you." The other whispers, "We can make you nothing." Which one feels easier to normalize over time? Katniss brushes against this edge when she and Gale go hunting near the lake. On the surface, it's a small deviation, old habit from District 12, but Coin's people treat it as a direct threat to the system. You stepped outside your work block, you bypassed rations, you acted on your own. The punishment on the table isn't a slap on the wrist, it's discipline that could include confinement. For going to get food, why does that matter so much? Because the relationship between citizen and authority in 13 is built on absolute predictability. The promise is, follow the schedule, you survive. Break it, and you're not just disobedient, you're dangerous. When Katniss pushes back, Plutarch and others rush to smooth things over, not because the rule is flexible, but because she's the Mockingjay. The symbol gets a buffer the average person never would. Compare that to the Capitol. Snow wants you to see the pain, the Hunger Games, public floggings, the execution of traitors on live television. Those are performances. The Capitol depends on fear as a show. Coin wants you to see the order, the boards, the drills, the calm reports of disciplinary action taken. The punishment is bureaucratic, signed off, filed away. And here's the unnerving part. When cruelty comes in forms you recognize, hearings, forms, scheduled penalties, it can feel almost reasonable, necessary. You start telling yourself there must have been a good reason. The system grinds people down without ever raising its voice. So which is more dangerous? A regime that needs constant spectacle, or one that can enforce obedience in total silence? Hold that question, because 13 isn't just managing bodies in cells, it's about to start managing victors, footage, and the games themselves. From arena to airwaves, how 13 replaces the Hunger Games with propaganda. So when 13 starts rolling out cameras, you realize something. The games aren't gone. They've just changed channels. This is where we talk about the propo, those tightly scripted, emotionally loaded broadcasts where Katniss, Peeta, Finnick, even Prim become recurring characters in a war series the whole country is forced to binge. At face value, they're the opposite of the arena. No kids killing each other on live TV, just messages of hope, courage, and resistance. But here's the real question. Why do they feel so familiar? Think about how a Capitol broadcast works. You get the recap, the slow motion deaths, the dramatic music swelling when a tribute makes a stand. The camera tells you who the hero is, who the monster is, and how you're supposed to feel. Now watch a propo. Katniss standing in the ashes of District 12. Gale narrating bombed out streets. Quick cuts between ruins and the Mockingjay pin catching the light. Different enemy, same tools. Curated narrative, precision editing, and a focus on individual faces that carry the entire emotional weight. We're going to cover Coin and Plutarch here, because that part matters because they're basically the new head game makers. Plutarch literally was one. In the Capitol, he designs arenas. In 13, he designs storylines. He decides when Katniss screams at the hospital bombing, when Peeta's gaunt face interrupts the feed, when Finnick drops secrets about Snow's poison and roses. Coin stands over all of it, approving which images of suffering, which displays of courage get beamed into every district. They're not just documenting a war, they're programming it. And notice the schedule. You had rigid daily assignments on the grey walls of 13. Now you have a media schedule across Panem. New propo drops after a capital atrocity. Peeta's interviews appear just when Katniss's influence spikes. Then, pattern interrupt. Peeta's hijacked attack on Katniss isn't just a plot twist for us. It's a live rebrand moment for 13. Instantly, Coin has a wounded symbol and a fresh excuse to tighten security and push harder militarily. Here's the real question. What is TV doing for each regime? The Capitol uses it to normalize the games and the Capitol's control, to make you believe oppression is entertainment with prizes. 13 uses it to normalize its own leadership and strategy. Obey Coin's battle plan, trust Plutarch's intel, accept mass casualties because your Mockingjay told you this is the only way. The promise isn't luxury anymore, it's victory if you follow orders. So if your image is being weaponized to move the masses, does it really matter whether the person behind the camera wears roses or a grey jumpsuit? There is a lot to uncover here, especially when the rebels start talking about which children deserve a final symbolic Hunger Games. Hold on to that, because the next step is seeing how far Coin is willing to go once the cameras stop rolling. Katniss the product. How 13 uses the Mockingjay. So when the cameras stop rolling, what does District 13 actually do with Katniss? They don't send her to therapy. They send her to wardrobe. This is where we talk about Katniss's evolution from tribute to symbol, and why 13 treats that transformation as a resource allocation problem, not a human being in recovery. Back in the first games, she's a terrified teenager with a bow, scrambling to survive. By the time she hits the bunker, she's not a victor to them, she's an asset. A warhead with good cheekbones. At face value, Coin welcomes her as the Mockingjay. But listen to the wording. It's always the title first, Katniss second. Coin doesn't ask how she's sleeping, what losing District 12 did to her, or why she keeps flinching at loud sounds. She asks what conditions Katniss needs to perform. Food, safety for her sister, access to Peeta's pardon. Maybe those aren't comforts. They're levers. Coin's relationship with her is all calibrated distance, never too warm, never openly cruel. She stands above Katniss in the first assembly, literally on a higher platform, delivering that speech about unity and sacrifice. But when Katniss pushes back, Coin doesn't explode the way Snow might. She pauses. You can almost see the mental spreadsheet. How much defiance makes the Mockingjay look authentic, and when it starts to threaten command. And then you have Plutarch and the Propos crew, who are basically the Capitol's prep team in grey jumpsuits. We're going to cover the tech later, but focus on the process. They script her lines. They stage the ruins of District 8 behind her. They coach her on when to draw the bow, when to look horrified, when to look hopeful. When she can't act in the studio, they manufacture spontaneous reactions by dropping her in real battle zones and filming the fallout. Tell me that doesn't sound familiar. In the Capitol, Cinna and the stylists design a girl on fire to sell a story to the audience. Haymitch feeds Katniss lines for the interviews, turning her into the tragic lover who might win sponsors. Different cause, same logic. Turn a person into a narrative object the crowd can project onto. The Capitol used sequins and chariots. 13 uses bombed hospitals and mass graves. Here's the real question. If you're the one being scripted, does it matter whether the propaganda sells dresses or revolution? Katniss keeps being told this is for a good reason, that every tear and every speech will end the games forever. But that part matters because it reframes her pain as expendable. If the outcome is victory for the district, then whatever happens to the girl in the center is acceptable collateral. So when Coin dangles Peeta's rescue as a reward for one more propos, you have to ask, is this freedom or just a new arena with better branding? Hold on to that, because next we need to look at what happens when the symbol starts asking her own questions, and how 13 reacts when their Mockingjay stops following the script. Peeta the weapon, imprisonment, hijacking, and strategic mercy. So when the Mockingjay stops following the script, District 13 does what any nervous regime does. It reaches for a different weapon. Enter Peeta. When he finally arrives in 13, he's not the boy with the bread anymore. He's the Capitol's unfinished project, hijacked, traumatized, primed to kill the very person he used to protect. At face value, you'd think that makes him a medical emergency, right? Someone you rush to a healer, not a war room. But watch how 13 reacts. They don't see Peeta first as a victim of the games. They see him as a contaminated asset. He's dragged out of the hovercraft in restraints, sedated, immediately surrounded by guards with guns. The relationship isn't doctor-patient, it's handler-threat. There is a lot to uncover here, because that first response tells you exactly what 13 values: control over compassion. This is where we talk about Coin. Her first instinct is brutally simple. Is he useful, or does he need to be eliminated? She says it almost clinically, as if she's signing off on reallocating grain rations instead of discussing the execution of a tortured victor. When Peeta is at his worst, she leans toward removal. When the doctors hint he might be stabilized, suddenly she's open to the idea of using him in Propose. Same boy, same trauma. Different strategic value. Here's the real question. How different is that from what Snow did? The Capitol used mutts, venom, and live television to tear Peeta apart in front of Panem. Their cruelty is theatrical, undeniable. District 13 uses isolation cells, security protocols, and classified reports. Peeta goes from a glass box in the Capitol to a concrete box underground. The tools change. The logic doesn't. He's still a piece on someone else's board. Think about how carefully they keep him sealed away. Limited access. Armed guards even in a supposedly safe district. He's spoken about in briefings, not in therapy sessions. The question is never just, how do we help him? But how do we prevent him from damaging the Mockingjay asset? That part matters because it exposes 13's core priority: protect the symbol, even if it means further dehumanizing the person. And the irony is sharp. The Capitol broke Peeta with needles and hijacker venom. 13 risks breaking what's left with observation windows and incident reports. One turns him into a monster for the cameras. The other turns him into a risk assessment code. So which is more dangerous? The system that revels in its cruelty, or the one that quietly justifies any cruelty as strategic? When harm becomes a line item in a war plan, there are fewer breaks, fewer guilty pauses, fewer chances for someone to say, "This has gone too far." Hold on to that, because we haven't even touched what happens when 13 starts applying that same moral math to entire crowds and to children who never stepped into an arena. The Coin Snow mirror, 2 dictators, 1 playbook. So when 13 starts running the same moral calculations on whole crowds, you have to ask, are we still in a war, or are we just in a different season of the same show? This is where we talk about the Coin Snow mirror. At face value, they couldn't look more opposite. Snow sits in a mansion dripping with roses, blood-scented perfume, and crystal champagne flutes. Coin rules from a concrete bunker under buzzing fluorescence, with ration lines and grey uniforms. Snow's parties overflow with exotic food. Coin's people measure out their protein cubes. One president weaponizes excess, the other weaponizes scarcity. But here's the real question. When you strip away the decor, roses or cinder block, what actually changes for the average person in a district? Both systems run on fear. In the Capitol, fear is theatrical. Public floggings, the games, televised executions. In 13, fear is administrative. Your schedule board, your assigned job, the quiet threat that wasting resources or stepping out of line will get you disappeared in a very efficient, very paperwork-heavy way. Both leaders also understand symbols in a way that would make any producer proud. Snow has the Hunger Games, the Victor's Village, the white roses, the ever-present smell that says, "I am everywhere." Coin has the Mockingjay, the Propo, the carefully staged hospital visit, the air raid drills that remind you the outside world is death and she is safety. Different props, same relationship to power. Control the image, and you control the story people tell themselves about why they obey. And when it comes to children, neither of them flinches. Snow sends kids into the arena every year, then escalates to a quarter quell that reaps from existing victors. Coin keeps Peeta imprisoned, turns his hijacking into both a warning and a tool, and finally proposes a symbolic Hunger Games using capital children. That part matters because it proves she doesn't hate the games on principle. She just hates not being the one in charge of them. Boggs sees this long before Katniss does. His warning that Coin will never give up power isn't paranoia. It's insider testimony from a man who's watched her run a nuclear-armed bunker where every meal, every minute, every broadcast goes through her chain of command. He's not switching sides in a war. He's realizing the war might just be a casting call. Plutarch, meanwhile, treats the post-war government as another production. New costumes, new sets, same format. He doesn't argue for dismantling the game's logic, he just wants a different script. There is a lot to uncover here, but the core reason it's chilling is simple. If the structure stays, the face on the screen barely matters. And that's what makes Coin in the long run more believable and more dangerous than Snow. Snow is a fairy tale villain. Poison, roses, a capital dripping in obvious decadence. You recognize him instantly. Coin looks reasonable, pragmatic, even necessary. She speaks in strategy, not sadism. Which system would you question faster? The one that calls cruelty justice and security and asks you to vote on it? Hold on to that, because we still haven't touched what happens when the Mockingjay brand itself becomes a tool either president can pick up. Hope versus fear. Why the Capitol needs the games and 13 doesn't. So when both presidents can hold up the same bird and call it freedom, here's the real question. Why does one of them still need the Hunger Games and the other doesn't touch an arena at all? This is where we talk about Snow's favorite subject, hope. Back in that conversation with Seneca Crane, Snow spells out the Capitol's entire strategy in one scene. Fear keeps people in line, but a little hope, that keeps them from giving up. The games are brutal on purpose, but they're also structured to dangle this tiny, poisonous promise. Maybe your district gets a victor. Maybe that means food, celebrations, a better life. At face value, that sounds deranged. You're watching children die so you can maybe win bread and parties. But that part matters because it turns terror into a lottery. The Capitol doesn't just punish you, it invites you to participate. One winner, 23 losers, and yet every reaping. Parents are doing the math in their heads. What are the odds? Could volunteering be worth it? You fear the games end in your child's life, but you also fear losing the chance, however rigged, to escape your own. So why doesn't District 13 build its own spectacle? Why no training center? No televised trials of capital war criminals. No arena where justice is put on display. On paper, they're the ones who should need propaganda the most. They're underground, starving, outgunned. Instead, 13's leadership strips everything theatrical away. No color, no excess, no distraction. Your schedule is on a wall. Your ration is on a tray. Your value is in your output. There is a lot to uncover here. The capital sells hope as entertainment. 13 sells survival as duty. In Snow's world, hope is external. You hope to be chosen, to be noticed, to be crowned a victor. In Coin's world, hope is internal and constantly endangered. The air you breathe, the food you eat, the nuclear arsenal that supposedly keeps you safe, all of it can be framed as barely hanging on. If survival itself is always at stake, what measure can't be justified? That's the dangerous relationship between fear and necessity. When Coin withholds information about Peeta, when she locks him up for everyone's safety, when she orders those final parachute bombs, every move can be wrapped in the same argument. We are at war, and war means sacrifice. You don't need a games to make people comply if you can convince them that any hesitation might literally end the human race. And here's the real question. Which system is harder to overthrow? The one that has to keep you entertained every year, or the one that can keep you marching on 4 hours of sleep because the clocks say so? A capital built on spectacle risks its own illusions. Break the show, break the spell. But a bunker society that doesn't need to amuse you to control you, that can outlast empires. Hold on to that, because we're going to cover what happens when Coin finally does propose her own version of the games, and who decides to play along. The Quiet Arena, how 13 turns all of life into a war effort. So when Coin finally floats her own version of the games, it isn't some wild leap for District 13. It's the logical endpoint of how they already live. Because in 13, you don't step into an arena, you wake up in one. Every wall schedule, every grey jumpsuit, every assignment board is telling you the same story. Whatever you do today, it's part of the war. You scrub latrines, you're protecting sanitation infrastructure, you wrap bandages, you're supporting combat readiness, you help shoot propose of Katniss in the hospital. Congratulations, you've just been drafted into psychological warfare. At face value, that sounds noble, even necessary. But here's the real question. What happens to a district when there is no such thing as a non-military job? This is where we talk about permanent emergency mode. In 13, the nuclear strike never really ended. The bunker survived, but the mindset stayed under rubble. The clocks blare you awake. The schedule boards assign you down to the half hour, and every deviation is treated as a threat. You accept rationing, curfews, surveillance, because the capital is out there, supposedly one bad day away from wiping you out. That part matters, because people will tolerate restrictions in wartime they would revolt against in peace. You don't argue about free time when you're told the wrong choice might get the whole district killed. Now put that next to the capital. Capital citizens also live with the games, but they get to compartmentalize. The arena is a channel you switch on, not a structure you wake up inside. You can cry over a tribute at breakfast and then spend the afternoon at the salon. Your job doesn't usually get framed as war work. It's fashion, entertainment, luxury. The relationship between you and the violence is mediated by screens and parties. so you can pretend it's just TV, not policy. In 13, there is no off switch. There's no front line and home front. The whole society is the battlefield. The command center is a few corridors away from the sleeping quarters. The hospital is also a set for Propo. Even the dining hall is a place where Coin can turn off the lights and deliver a speech that feels half briefing, half verdict. You're never just a citizen, you're always a piece on a board someone else is moving, and once you train a population to see war as normal, what kind of leader thrives there? A permanent one, a coin. If every task can be framed as for victory, then any dissent can be framed as sabotage. There is a lot to uncover here, but the core reason 13 is so dangerous is that its promise of freedom is always postponed to after the war, and the war never really ends. So what happens when a victor from those games of survival walks into that system and refuses to play the role on the schedule board? We're going to cover how Katniss becomes the one variable 13 can't fully script, and why Coin underestimates the girl on fire the same way Snow did. Pattern break. What if you actually had to choose where to live? Forget Katniss, forget Coin, forget Snow. If you had to pick right now, you wake up tomorrow as an average citizen in the capital or in District 13. Where are you going? At face value, the capital sounds obvious, right? Colorful food, hot showers, no tesserae, no schedule board telling you when you're allowed to sleep. You're not a victor. You're not Snow. You're just one more person in a city built on distraction. Most days, the games are something that happen on a screen while you sip something fizzy. The threat is there, but it feels distant. District 13 is the opposite kind of promise. Number televised games, no parading children in flames, you're safe from spectacle. But you trade that for a concrete bunker, grey uniforms, and a wall-sized timetable that decides your entire day. Work block, mess hall, training, sleep. Every movement logged, every absence noticed. Privacy becomes suspicious. Choice becomes a resource nobody can afford. So here's the real question. Which kind of danger feels worse to you? The capital's random, spectacular punishment if you step out of line, or 13's constant low-level control that never lets you step out of line in the first place? One gives you freedom until the moment it doesn't. The other gives you survival, but only if you agree that your life belongs to the district. Notice your first instinct. Did you rush toward the capital because you value comfort and personal freedom, even with the risk of being bombed when the war hits the city? Or did you lean toward 13, thinking, at least I'm not being forced to watch children die on TV, even if that means your relationships, your job, your future are all pre-assigned? That part matters because it exposes how you rank freedom versus security. The capital says, we'll let you play as long as the games go on. District 13 says, we'll keep you alive as long as you follow the schedule. Both systems use the same bargain, hope in exchange for obedience. And Katniss, she never really gets this choice. She's dragged from starving district to capital victor to underground soldier. Snow turns her into the girl on fire to stabilize the games. Coin turns her into the Mockingjay to destabilize the capital. Different leaders, same relationship to her. Weapon first, person second. There is a lot to uncover here, because when you imagine yourself under each system, you start to feel what Katniss is pushed through without consent. You start to see why after the war is always dangled but never delivered. This is where we talk about what happens when someone in 13 stops cooperating. When the schedule isn't enough. When dissent shows up, how does a district that survived nukes respond to internal threats? And why might that be even more terrifying than anything the Capitol puts on a screen? Dissent in the bunker. Why no one in 13 can be a Katniss? So here's the unsettling part. In all our time in District 13, we never meet their Katniss. No homegrown Mockingjay, no native rebel icon. For a district that's supposedly been fighting the Capitol for decades, that silence is loud, because look at who actually fuels the resistance energy. It's Katniss, Peeta, Finnick, Johanna, victors from the games. It's refugees from firebombed districts. At face value, 13 is the headquarters of the revolution. But here's the real question. Why does every meaningful spark seem to be imported? This is where we talk about structure. The schedule boards on the walls, the buzzers, the identical grey uniforms, those aren't just quirky bunker aesthetics, they're a preemptive strike against imagination. When every minute of your day is assigned, when your meals, your job, your free time are all rationed, when you literally have a number on your arm, when do you even have the space to ask why or to gather enough people to do anything about it? We're going to cover surveillance too, because that part matters because it's invisible until it isn't. Katniss tries to sneak around, she's followed. She questions Coin in public, instantly contained, spun, redeployed as propaganda. In 13, the cameras aren't there to watch a spectacle the way the Capitol uses the games. They're there to make sure a spectacle never starts. Now contrast that with the Capitol. On paper, it should be more stable. Bread, circuses, neon hair. But people like Cinna, Plutarch, even Katniss's prep team quietly push back from inside the system. Cinna embeds rebellion into a dress. Plutarch fakes loyalty for years, then flips. The prep team, who are supposedly shallow, end up horrified by what's done to Katniss. The Capitol's decadence accidentally creates pockets of conscience, and those pockets become fault lines. In 13, the culture of sacrifice closes those cracks before they form. Equality sounds noble. Everyone eats the same grey mush. Everyone wears the same grey clothes. Everyone shares the burden. But the unspoken rule is brutal. If we're all suffering together, then complaining isn't critique. It's betrayal. You're not a dissident. You're endangering survival. How do you become a Katniss in a place where merely asking a hard question feels like treason? So you end up with a paradox. The Capitol, with its obvious cruelty, still generates internal rebels. District 13, which promises justice, can't seem to produce its own symbol of resistance at all. And that's the real warning sign. A system that can't grow its own Katniss is less likely to be challenged and more likely to ossify into permanent authoritarianism. But if 13 can't create a rebel figure, why is Coin so obsessed with owning one, and what does she plan to do once she doesn't need Katniss anymore? Children of the bunker, how 13 raises its next generation. So if Coin can't grow her own Katniss, what does she do instead? She grows something else. Children. This is where we talk about District 13's next generation, because the real long game of any authoritarian system isn't just who fights the war, it's who's being raised to never question the peace that comes after. At face value, the kids of 13 look fine. You see orderly classrooms, kids in identical grey, reciting history and learning their assigned skills. Their schedules are on the same flashing boards as everyone else's. School in the morning, training or work blocks in the afternoon, communal meals, curfew. It feels efficient, safe. But here's the real question. What are they being prepared for? In 13, childhood is basically a prequel to deployment. Every subject points toward the war effort: logistics, medicine, weapons maintenance, communications. You're not dreaming about being an artist or baker. You're being slotted into a role that keeps the bunker running or the rebellion supplied. The expectation is seamless. You age out of school and age directly into service. No gap, no wandering, no what do I want. Now compare that to capital children. They grow up drenched in games propaganda, sure, but also in excess. Parties, fashion, entertainment, constant stimulation. Their relationship to the games is as viewers, betters, costume designers in training. They're taught to see tributes as characters, not people. That part matters because it shows two different strategies. The capital distracts its kids into obedience. There is a lot to uncover here in how history is taught. In 13's version, the capital is pure, concentrated evil. 13 is the righteous survivor that never broke, never compromised, never did anything morally grey to stay alive. There's no space in the lesson plan for the capital is horrific, but 13's methods are also terrifying. No space for asking why nuclear weapons, secret bunkers, and execution for theft might be a problem. And when you're born underground, you don't even know what you're missing. You've never walked through a market, never seen a forest, never experienced a district that isn't on a war footing. The bunker isn't a sacrifice, it's just the world. That default is powerful. If you've never seen an alternative, the system doesn't have to convince you it's good. It just has to convince you it's inevitable. So what happens if Coin lives? We're going to cover her endgame later. But the chilling piece is this. Those kids would become the first full generation to know only her version of Panem, her history, her enemies, her temporary security measures that mysteriously never end. No Katniss on a screen, reminding them the games were wrong. Just a neat story where 13 saved the world and must therefore run it forever. And once you have a whole generation raised to believe that, what kind of rebellion is even possible anymore? The ethics of necessary evil. Does 13 ever plan to stop? And that's where the defense of District 13 always shows up. They had to, they were at war. Of course there were schedules and bunkers and no one gets seconds in the cafeteria. At face value, it sounds reasonable. You tell yourself, if the capital has peacekeepers and mutts and airborne firebombs, then 13 needs curfews, strict ranks and zero tolerance. It's uncomfortable, but temporary. The promise is, once snow falls, everything relaxes. You win the war, then you get your freedom. Right? Here's the real question. Where is that actually written down? Where does Coin ever outline a concrete path from military bunker to free Panem? This is where we talk about Boggs. Boggs is not a rebel hothead. He's Coin's own right hand, a true believer in the cause. And he still pulls Katniss aside and warns her, don't trust Coin. She's already positioning you as a threat to be removed once you're no longer useful. That part matters because Boggs isn't speculating about the capital. He's describing the internal logic of 13's leadership. Power is something to be managed, not shared. Watch Coin's behavior the second the capital starts to crumble. She doesn't slow down. She accelerates. She controls the flow of information about Prim's death, drip-feeding Katniss just enough to keep her off balance. She stages the victor's vote on a symbolic final Hunger Games as a public ritual, managing the room, reading faces, turning raw grief into a mandate. That's not a reluctant general reluctantly wielding emergency powers. That's a politician test-driving her future regime. And the proposal itself is the smoking gun. After everything, Coin's first major post-No policy suggestion is another Hunger Games, not truth commissions, a new round of state-sanctioned child murder, just with the districts and the capital reversed. You don't design a new version of the games if your long-term plan is to make sure they never happen again. Pattern interrupt for a second. If someone tells you the torture chamber is only temporary, but they're already drafting blueprints for an upgraded model, how temporary does it feel? Historically, that's how emergency measures work. You declare a crisis, suspend normal rights, centralize authority for now. Then the war ends, or the threat passes, and somehow the surveillance programs, the special courts, the expanded police powers, stay. There is a lot to uncover here, but the short version is systems that are built for control rarely dismantle themselves voluntarily. There's always another enemy, another reason to keep the switch flipped on. So if Katniss hadn't killed Coin on that balcony, what actual mechanism existed to make 13 less authoritarian later? No constitution, no elections scheduled, no promise of demobilization, just a nuclear-armed district, a victorious president with a taste for games, and a traumatized nation taught that strong men are the only thing standing between them and chaos. And once you see that, you have to ask, was the war ever about ending tyranny, or just changing who sat in the victor's chair? Book versus movie. How the films soften District 13's horror. So here's the twist. If District 13 is so dangerous on the page, why, when you watch the movies, does it almost feel reassuring? Clean, organized, a little stern, sure, but basically the responsible adult in the room. At face value, the films present 13 as the sober antidote to the capital's chaos. You get those wide, well-lit corridors, people in neat grey uniforms walking with purpose, no one screaming at peacekeepers or rioting for bread. Coin stands at the podium framed in calm, centered shots, firm but collected, the camera treating her almost as a mentor figure to Katniss. You can feel the movie language nudging you. This is the safe bunker. These are the good adults. But here's the real question. Is that actually what Suzanne Collins wrote? In the books, 13 is not a minimalist war hotel. It's a pressure cooker. The first thing that hits you is the claustrophobia. Katniss describes the underground halls as cramped, airless, packed with people who never really get outside. You're assigned a compartment, not a home. You eat in shifts, at long communal tables, under constant supervision. Hunger isn't as theatrical as in the seam, but rations are strict enough that you're always aware of scarcity. The relationship between you and the district is transactional. Follow the schedule, or you don't get fed. This is where we talk about those schedule boards. On screen, they're a cool world-building detail. In the books, they're a cage. Every minute of your day is printed, color-coded, and monitored. Oversleep? You get reprimanded. Skip a task? It's logged. Katniss feels managed, not rescued. There is a lot to uncover here, because that part matters, because it quietly mirrors the Capitol's control, only with efficiency instead of excess. The films downplay that intensity. We don't really see Katniss dragged to therapy sessions she doesn't want, or punished for missing duties, or the full grind of mandatory training blocks. The constant surveillance she feels on the page, cameras, guards, Coin's people tracking her every move, gets softened into general security. Even Coin's moral unease is trimmed. Her coldness toward Peeta's torture, her willingness to let Katniss walk into danger as a useful symbol, her obsession with optics, most of that is hinted at, not dwelled on. Visually, the movies also use classic hero side cues. When Katniss arrives, swelling music, steady handheld shots, Boggs and Plutarch flanking her like trusted allies. Compare that to how the Capitol is shot. Off-center angles, grotesque costumes, snow literally wreathed in white roses. The film grammar quietly tells you which team to root for, at least until Coin suggests a final Hunger Games and the score drops out. So why does this matter for Danger? Because when you read the books, Coin's threat is obvious much earlier. Her speeches about unity sound hollow, Boggs's warnings land harder. The vote for a new games feels inevitable, not shocking. The warning isn't just tyranny is bad, it's that a disciplined, hungry nuclear-armed district that feels righteous can be more efficient at oppression than a decadent capital high on spectacle. And once you see that on the page, you start asking a darker follow-up. If the films sand down 13's edges, what else are they making easier for us to accept? Visual coding. Grey isn't neutral, it's a warning sign. And the films don't just tell you that. They show you. District 13's danger is baked into the visuals before anyone ever gives a speech. This is where we talk about color, or rather, the total absence of it. You go from the Capitol's neon chaos, teal hair, gold eyeliner, Peeta's glittery suits, to a bunker where everything is the same washed-out spectrum of grey, black and white. Walls, uniforms, floors, even the food trays feel drained. At face value, that palette reads as serious and safe. After the firebombed ruins of District 12 and the Capitol's carnival of cruelty, your brain goes, okay, concrete steel, order, finally. Grey says, no more games, no more spectacle, just survival. But here's the real question. Why does it also feel dead? There is a lot to uncover here, because that part matters more than we want to admit. Grey has a double meaning on screen. In a hospital, it's calming. In a prison, it's suffocating. 13 leans hard into the second. The uniform jumpsuits erase class differences, sure, but they also erase individuality. No personal colors, no district-specific fabrics, no little flashes of identity we saw even in the poorest districts. Remember Rue's woven necklace or Katniss's reaping dress in 12? Those are gone. Now everyone blends into the bunker walls. The message is subtle but relentless. Your role is to fit the schedule board, not stand out. The camera reinforces it with those long, flat corridors where people stream past in identical outfits, heads down. You can almost feel the air getting thinner. Safety has a cost, and the cost is color. which is exactly why Katniss's Mockingjay armor hits so hard. She walks into that grey world in matte black plates, bird-like curves, and a flaming pin on her chest. She doesn't match anything. Visually, she's a glitch in the system. She's supposed to be their symbol, their asset, but every frame reminds you she's also a threat to their uniformity. The armor doesn't just protect her body, it protects her from being absorbed. Coin understands this. Look at her presentation. Simple hair pulled back, plain jumpsuits, muted makeup. She's the anti-Snow. No roses, no blood-red lips, no fur-lined coats. And that creates a relationship of instant trust with the audience. You see excess and you think villain. You see restraint and you think reason, discipline, hope. But here's the real question. Is plainness actually moral or just a different costume? We're going to cover Coin's strategy more later, but the visuals already gave you the warning label. 13's grey isn't neutral. It's a controlled environment where deviation is dangerous. The films hand you every clue you need to distrust this district. We just overlook them because we're desperate for a good side to root for. So when that good side starts making decisions that mirror the capital, the color language has already prepared you. You just have to notice what's been drained away. The Prim bombing, Coin's most chilling move, so when that good side drains all the color out of the frame, you're primed to trust it. Grey means safe, orderly, rational. But here's the real question. What happens when that same grey hand signs off on the single most chilling move in the entire war? This is where we talk about the Prim bombing. You remember the sequence. The capital's defenses have basically collapsed. Snow's mansion is the last bright spot in a burning city, and suddenly, parachutes start drifting down toward a barricade of capital children. At face value, it looks familiar. Little silver gifts, the same design language as the arena, the promise of help. The games have trained every child in Panem to reach up when a parachute falls. Why would this moment be any different? The first wave explodes. Children are torn apart on their own doorstep, in front of Snow's house, on live feeds. Then there's a pause, long enough for the medics to rush in, long enough for you to notice Prim in her District 13 medic uniform, moving forward because that's who she is. And then the second wave detonates, targeting the people who came to help. That part matters because it's not just cruel, it's engineered. It's a trap built on instinct, training, and hope. So whose trap is it? Snow takes the blame in the chaos, but we're going to cover the theory that turns this moment inside out, that Coin orchestrated it. Boggs literally warns Katniss that Coin sees her as a threat. Plutarch admits that 13's leadership is already thinking about the next administration. If you're Alma Coin, what's the fastest way to break the capital's will and remove your rival in one move? You hit his doorstep, you make him a monster to his own people, and you make sure the Mockingjay is too shattered to ask the wrong question. Notice the echo. The capital used children in the games for spectacle. Coin uses children and medics as bait for strategy. The capital's relationship to violence is decadent. It needs an audience. District 13's is colder. It needs an outcome. In a way, that's scarier. At least Snow pretends it's about entertainment. Coin doesn't even bother with that. And then, immediately, she pivots. Before the blood is dry, Coin is on a balcony, using the emotional fallout to call for Snow's swift execution and a rapid transition that just happens to leave her in charge. No elections, no real debate, just a speech over a traumatized capital. Here's the real question. When she later proposes a symbolic Hunger Games for capital children, isn't she just admitting what the bombing already proved? That she's willing to replicate the game's logic, sacrificing innocence for political theatre without even needing an arena. So if Prim's death is Coin's move, not Snow's, what does that say about the future Panem almost got? The final Hunger Games vote, 13's true face slips. So when Coin calls that secret meeting of the remaining victors, you're not just watching a political formality, you're watching her test whether Panem is ready for a new kind of games. She lays it out with that cool, clinical tone. One final symbolic Hunger Games, using the capital's children. At face value, it sounds like balance. The districts suffered for 75 years. Now the capital will know what it feels like. It's packaged as justice, as closure, almost as a ritual to seal the war. But here's the real question. Why is the new president of Panem opening her term by pitching child sacrifice as a branding exercise? Coin doesn't present this as a reluctant, last resort concession to a furious population she can't control. She initiates it, she frames it, she names it symbolic. That part matters because it tells you what she thinks the games are for. Not survival, not even punishment. Spectacle with a moral label slapped on top. She's redirecting the same instinct Snow exploited, your hunger for someone to pay, and using it to legitimize her own rule. Remember, the districts don't even get a direct vote here. It's a tiny council of victors, the people who know better than anyone what the arena really is. If Coin genuinely wanted to dismantle the game's logic, this is where we'd see it. A firm line, a public promise that no more children die for politics. Instead, we're going to cover a room where trauma is mined for policy. The responses are fractured. Annie, who's already lost Finnick, says no. She doesn't need more blood to understand justice. Beatty, the strategist who's seen every angle of the system, also votes no. He knows you can't build a new order on the old arena. Joanna, shattered and furious, votes yes, because revenge is the only language her nervous system still speaks. And Haymitch? He waits. He watches Katniss. This is where we talk about Katniss's yes. On the surface, it reads as her finally breaking, choosing revenge on innocent children because she's lost Prim. But Katniss isn't Coin's audience anymore. She's Coin's mirror. She votes yes precisely because she recognizes that Coin is Snow with better branding, and she needs Coin to believe they're aligned. It's a strategic signal. I understand the rules you're playing by. I'll play along. For now, Haymitch follows her lead, which tells you their relationship has shifted from mentor and tribute to co-conspirators reading the same threat. If Coin can so casually propose a new games, what does that say about the constitution she's going to write? About elections that may never come? The vote itself is the real indictment. The moment the question is even on the table, you know District 13 was never planning to erase the games' logic, only to flip the seating chart, new president in the box seats, new children in the arena. And if the system survives just with different targets, did the revolution actually change Panem at all? Katniss's last arrow, why Coin had to die. So when Katniss steps onto that execution platform, You think you know how this ends. Snow in chains, coin on the balcony, the crowd primed for blood. At face value, it's Justice Day in Panem. The tyrant dies, the revolution wins, the story closes its circle. But here's the real question. Why does that scene feel wrong before Katniss even raises the bow? The staging is too familiar. The balcony, the spectacle, the president elevated above the crowd while a helpless enemy is displayed as proof of power. We've seen this before. Only last time, it was the Capitol's arena. This is where we talk about Katniss's math, not the tactical stuff, the moral equation. Prim is dead because someone ordered a double-wave bombing on children and medics. The Propo have turned her into a permanent symbol instead of a person. And then Coin calls a vote for a final Hunger Games using capital children, selling it as symbolic justice. If you're Katniss, how many data points do you need before you see the pattern? Different president, same games. Katniss watches Coin in that moment the way she once watched snow on a giant screen. The careful speech, the rehearsed grief, the promise of a safer Panem if everyone just accepts her solution. That part matters because it's not rage that guides Katniss's last arrow, it's recognition. Coin isn't stepping into a new world, she's stepping into Snow's footprint, down to the elevated platform and the choreographed crowd. So why kill Coin instead of Snow, the man who actually destroyed her district and ordered her friends' deaths? The brutal answer is that Snow is already finished. He's coughing blood, politically disarmed, surrounded by enemies. Killing him would be cathartic, but it wouldn't change the system. Killing Coin in front of everyone is Katniss refusing to give her blessing to a rebooted version of the same regime. She destabilizes the victory on purpose. You can feel the story pulling back here and asking a bigger question. Were we ever just fighting the Capitol? Or were we fighting the game's logic underneath it? We're going to cover District 13's schedules, its surveillance, its nuclear leverage, but the execution scene is the verdict. The enemy was never only the decadent Capitol with its parties and its roses. It was any structure that treats people as pieces on a board, whether that board is an arena or a war map. Pattern interrupt. In a different story, Coin's plan works. The victors vote yes, the Capitol children die, the districts cheer, and history books call it balance. But the trilogy refuses that ending. Katniss's arrow says there is no such thing as a good tyranny, no matter which district it comes from or which children it targets. And once you see that, District 13 stops reading as the scrappy underground hero and starts looking uncomfortably close to the thing it swore to destroy. What if Coin had lived? The Panem that almost was. So if District 13 isn't the scrappy underground hero, what happens if it actually wins? Not just the war, the aftermath, the boring, dangerous part, where laws get written and power stops pretending it's temporary. At face value, Coin promises exactly what you'd want after the Capitol falls. Order, safety, a plan. Panem is in ruins. The districts are starving. The Capitol is traumatized. Of course, someone has to coordinate food, security, reconstruction. But here's the real question. Who gets to decide when the emergency is over? This is where we talk about Coin's dream Panem, because the books quietly sketch it in the background. You can already see the blueprint in 13, a government permanently centralized in that bunker, justified by the need to rebuild and protect the new republic. Elections, maybe on paper, but real power sits with the woman who controls the nukes, the Air Force, and the schedules on the grey concrete walls. Think about those schedule boards in 13. Every minute of your day assigned. Work, meals, sleep, even your shower. Back then, they could say, "We're at war, this is survival." So why would they suddenly relax once they're in charge of every district? The reason they work is the same reason Snow's games work: predictability. A population that always knows where it's supposed to be is a population that's easy to watch. So you take 13's strict rationing, their military-style organization, their zero tolerance for skipped drills, and you export it. District 4's fishing crews run on 13's clock. District 7's lumber quotas get tracked by 13's tablets. Even the capital survivors find themselves on protein paste and curfews. The capital's flashy excess is gone, but the hunger doesn't disappear. It just gets evenly, efficiently managed. But what about the games? Coin tells the victors she wants one last symbolic Hunger Games with capital children. That part matters because it's not just about revenge. It's a test balloon. If the new Panem can accept that, what else can be framed as justice? You don't even need arenas with mutts. You can have public trials for war criminals, mandatory service lotteries for dangerous cleanup missions, televised tribunals where the audience votes on punishment. The spectacle shrinks, but the logic stays. You still teach every district kid the same lesson. The state can put your life on the line and call it necessary. And you know the propaganda would evolve right alongside it. We're going to cover how Snow sold hope through victors, but Coin's version would be vigilance. Constant broadcasts about capital sympathizers, black market traitors, internal threats to unity. Katniss the Mockingjay gets retired as a war hero and replaced with stern PSAs and carefully edited footage of peaceful, obedient districts. So you end up with a Panem that traded neon cruelty for concrete control. Fewer parties, fewer roses, maybe even fewer dead children on camera, but more cameras in every hallway, more schedules, more quiet fear. The relationship between citizen and government doesn't heal. It just changes uniforms. And the scariest part, on the surface, it might feel better, cleaner, fairer. Which raises the next question. How long would it take before anyone even realized they were still trapped in someone else's game? 13's export model, turning the whole map into a bunker. So if District 13 wins the war and steps into the capital's old office, what happens next? Do they rebuild plazas and parades? Or do they export the bunker? This is where we talk about 13's real endgame, not just surviving underground, but teaching everyone else to live that way too. Because once you've convinced yourself that rigid schedules and ration boards are the only reason you're still alive, why would you ever turn them off? Picture District 12 after the war. The ashes are cleared, the victor's village is still standing, and a new train rolls in. But instead of peacekeepers with whips, you get administrators with clipboards. At face value, it sounds better. No more tesserae, no more reaping, just fair distribution. Everyone gets a work assignment, everyone gets a food allotment, everyone's name is on a schedule board. It's safety by spreadsheet. When every hour of your day is assigned for stability, how different is that relationship from the capitals? You're not starving for Snow's amusement anymore, but you also don't get to decide when you work, when you rest, or even when you stand in line for your protein cube. That part matters because control wrapped in the promise of equality is harder to argue with than control wrapped in sequins. Now fold former capital citizens into this. The victors of that old system, or at least the ones who thought they were, they don't get mansions and makeover teams. They get re-education seminars and psychological evaluations. You can almost hear Coin's pitch. Everyone contributes now. No more parasites. On paper, no one is above anyone else. In reality, these people are tagged as high risk, monitored, and quietly slotted into the least sensitive labor roles. You were a stylist? Congratulations, you're sorting uniforms in District 8. You were a games technician. You're on a repair crew in 5, under surveillance 24/7. Any complaint about conditions, any nostalgia for the capital, instantly becomes evidence of lingering corruption. There is a lot to uncover here, because dissent doesn't disappear. It just gets a new diagnostic label. And what about districts that had carved out their own power under snow? District 2 with its peacekeeper pipeline. District 4 with its semi-privileged fishing fleets. They're used to negotiating, bending rules, trading favors. Suddenly, a central government in Former 13 tells them every district will follow the same schedule template, the same ration formula, the same propaganda broadcasts. So when 2 pushes back, when 4 questions why their skilled workers are being reassigned, the answer writes itself. You're putting your own comfort above Panem's recovery. You sound a lot like the capital. Resistance stops being political and becomes pathological, selfish, unpatriotic, dangerous. And here's the twist. By turning every district into a soft bunker, regulated, monitored, standardized, Coin doesn't just end the Hunger Games. She makes them unnecessary. Why build an arena when the entire map is already wired for control? The next rebellion wouldn't have a decadent capital to rally against. It would be fighting a system that insists it's doing all this for your own good. So the games are gone, but is Panem actually free? Or just playing a slower, quieter version of the same game? 13 versus the capital. Which society actually breaks you more? So if the games are gone and the arena is supposedly dismantled, where do you actually want to wake up tomorrow? In a penthouse in the capital, or in a concrete bunk in 13? At face value, that sounds easy. Champagne fountains versus grey porridge. But here's the real question. Which system does more damage to an ordinary mind over time, once you're not a victor or a symbol, just a person trying to get through the day? In the capital, your morning starts late. Real coffee, rich food, no ration lines. Your biggest decision is which outrageous outfit to wear while you scroll through stylized war updates that never really touch you. Work, if you have it, revolves around entertainment, design, or administration. Then, it's parties, surgeries, gossip. The capital promises you that history is something that happens to other districts on other screens. In 13, the alarm goes off at 0600, not your choice. Your schedule is already posted on the wall. Work block, meal block, training block, sleep. You line up for identical portions, identical clothes, identical days. You don't browse news, you receive announcements. You don't pick a job, the district assigns you a function. That part matters because your time, your body, and your thoughts are all being quietly budgeted. So what kind of fear do you live with in each place? In the capital, terror is spectacular and rare. One day, the power flickers, the broadcasts cut, and suddenly there are bombs, hijacked interviews, a bleeding Peeta on your screen. Your fear arrives in spikes, wrapped in drama, then it's smoothed over with new parties and a fresh propaganda spin. In 13, the fear is smaller but constant. You worry about saying the wrong thing in the cafeteria, about missing a work shift on the board, about what happens to people who disappear from the schedule. No one is dragged onto a stage and executed for your entertainment. They're just reassigned or gone. There is a lot to uncover here about how low-level anxiety can wear you down more efficiently than open terror. Mentally, both systems ask you to split yourself in half. In the capital, you have to enjoy your comfort while knowing, somewhere in the back of your mind, that it's built on children dying in the games. You either compartmentalize hard, or you start to crack under the cognitive dissonance. In 13, you're told the suffering is necessary, strategic, the only reason Panem still has hope. But this is where we talk about autonomy. You're surviving, sure, but on someone else's terms, under someone else's watchful eye. So which world gives you more space to even imagine change? Privately, in your own head? The decadent capital, where you can technically think anything but a train not to care? Or 13's bunker, where caring is mandatory but questioning the structure is dangerous? And if one system breaks you in a burst and the other sands you down grain by grain, which would you actually choose to stand in when the next leader decides what game gets played next? Are the good guys ever safe? The moral grey zone of District 13. So here's the uncomfortable turn. Once you see how District 13 operates, that neat story in your head of evil capital, righteous rebels, doesn't really hold, does it? If both systems are willing to break you to win their war, who actually counts as the victor? At face value, 13 is the promise you've been waiting for. No more games, no more snow, no more children on television dying for ratings. But here's the real question. When your new government runs your day on a schedule board, assigns your identity with a tattoo, and threatens you for stepping out of line, are you free or just in a different arena? There is a lot to uncover here, because Collins isn't just swapping villains, she's attacking the whole hope of a clean revolution. This is where we talk about the good people inside a compromised system. Take Boggs. He's loyal military, follows Coin's orders, marches Katniss through a literal war zone. He's complicit in 13's machine. And yet he's the one warning her not to trust Coin, the one who sees the pattern. A leader using the Mockingjay as a weapon, then planning to discard her. Same with Plutarch. He defected from the capital, helped rig the Quarterquell, masterminded the rebellion. But he also scripts Katniss's grief, edits Peeta's suffering into propo material, and shrugs that this is just how power works now. Those characters matter because they kill the fantasy that you can stand in a pure place once the bombs start falling. You're always trading something. Safety for autonomy. Victory for innocence. And then there's Katniss herself. She's supposed to be our moral compass, right? But by the end, she's voting for a final symbolic Hunger Games on capital children. Not because she believes in it as justice, but as a ploy, a move to get close enough to Coin to take the shot. She assassinates the new president in public, then walks away from formal politics entirely. She doesn't seize power. She doesn't draft a constitution. She retreats to District 12 with Peeta and the memory of every child who died for someone else's strategy. So why does Collins take her there? The reason is brutal. 13 exists to prove that once you start playing for control on a national scale, the temptation to use people as pieces never really goes away. Even the districts that were victims learn fast how effective fear, spectacle, and sacrifice can be when they're the ones calling the shots. And that sets up the hardest question of all. In a world built on the games, can any large-scale movement stay good after it wins? Or does victory always demand a new arena and a fresh set of tributes? Hold on to that, because next we're going to cover what happens when the war ends. But the logic of the games refuses to die. Real-world echoes, bunkers, emergencies, and forever wars. So when the war ends on paper, but the logic of the games keeps breathing, where do you see it next? In a bunker, under a mountain, on a schedule board. District 13 is what happens when a whole society decides the emergency never ends. At face value, you can point to the history. They were nuked, they went underground, they survived by being disciplined. That part matters because it sounds reasonable. Of course, you'd accept curfews, rationing, surveillance, if the alternative is total annihilation, right? But here's the real question. What happens when you forget to turn those things off? There is a lot to uncover here, and this is where we talk about real-world echoes. Wartime governments have always done versions of what 13 does. During the World Wars, you had blackout curtains, food coupons, propaganda reels telling you to sacrifice for victory. In the Cold War, you get nuclear bunker planning, continuity of government bunkers, entire shadow capitals built under mountains. The promise is always the same: give up a little freedom now, so we can all make it to tomorrow. The problem is, now has a way of stretching. Emergency laws linger decades after the bombs stop falling. Surveillance programs built to track enemies get turned inward, onto citizens. Security checkpoints become permanent architecture. In Panem, the capital kills for spectacle. In 13, they control for survival. Different aesthetic, same core relationship to power. Coin's rhetoric fits right into that tradition. She stands in front of the district and talks about unity, sacrifice, the honor of doing your part. It sounds steady, rational, almost comforting compared to Snow's roses and poison. But listen to the subtext. Questioning her plan is framed as endangering everyone. Dissent isn't just disagreement, it's treason against the bunker. How do you argue policy when the counter-argument is, do you want us all to die? We're going to cover the way that shows up in real leaders too. From national security states of emergency that never sunset, to temporary curfews and mass data collection. The pattern is familiar. Leaders invoke unity and sacrifice to close the debate before it starts. You're not allowed to ask why, you're only allowed to prove that you're loyal. And that's the core danger 13 embodies. The moment you accept any loss of freedom as necessary, you also have to demand limits and exit plans. When does the rationing end? When do the cameras come down? Who decides when the threat is over? In 13, no one asks, because the war is the permanent answer to every question. District 13 isn't just a fictional bunker, it's a warning label. It shows you how fear and survivalism can justify almost anything, from rigid schedules to secret prisons, to a leader who quietly plans her own version of the games. So the real question for us isn't whether 13 is worse than the capital, it's how close any of our own forever emergencies are to becoming their own District 13. And once you see that, Coin's endgame starts to look a lot less surprising and a lot more inevitable. Why District 13 scares us less, and why that's the problem. So if Coin's endgame feels inevitable, why doesn't District 13 feel as scary in your gut as the capital does? Because our brains have been trained to look for villains who smell like blood and roses. Snow is theatrical. White suits, red mouth, poison breath. He's a walking warning label. At face value, he fits the storybook version of evil so perfectly that when we get to Coin, grey hair, grey clothes, grey bunker, your instincts relax. She looks reasonable, tired, even responsible. And here's the real question. When you've spent 2 books drowning in the capital's excess, how much do you want a leader who doesn't sparkle? That desire for a good side is doing a lot of the work here. You want someone to trust. Katniss wants someone to trust. The districts need a reason to hope that all this suffering is going somewhere. So when 13 offers structure, food, and a plan, we accept the trade without reading the fine print. Mandatory schedules posted on giant boards? Sure, that's just efficiency in wartime. Public punishments? Well, discipline keeps everyone alive. Right. There is a lot to uncover here, because those are the same rationalizations people inside any system use. From the outside, you can see the relationship between Coin's propaganda videos and Snow's televised games. From the inside, it just feels necessary. You tell yourself, this isn't the capital. These are our bombs, our broadcasts, our leader. That part matters because the story is quietly asking why we think ownership automatically makes power safer, and the narrative helps you miss it. This is where we talk about focus as a kind of camouflage. Almost every big emotional beat is aimed at defeating the capital, rescuing Peeta, storming the city, breaking Snow. The camera keeps pointing up at the mansion so you don't notice what's being built below ground. While you're watching the White Roses, Coin is testing out a proposed star, consolidating a nuclear arsenal and deciding which children will be acceptable collateral. So which system is more dangerous? The one that flaunts its cruelty, or the one that wraps it in strategy and shared trauma? District 13 doesn't throw parties. It holds votes. It doesn't stage the games for spectacle. It proposes a symbolic final Hunger Games as justice. From the inside, that sounds measured. Democratic even. But here's the real question. If you can talk yourself into new games for the right victims, how far are you really from Snow? Recognizing that is part of growing up with this series, the first time through, it's a rebellion fantasy. Topple the bad capital, hand power to the rebels, roll credits. On reread, you see Boggs warning Katniss about Coin. You see Prim dying in a plan Coin likely approved, and you watch Katniss realize that simply flipping who runs the arena doesn't end the games. It just resets the scoreboard. And that sets us up for the hardest question of all. What does it actually mean to break the cycle instead of just changing who holds the whip hand? Viewer's choice? Capital or 13? Where do you survive? So let's turn that whip hand into a choice you actually have to make. If you woke up in Panem tomorrow, knowing everything you know now, where are you trying to survive? The glittering terror of the capital, or the concrete bunker of District 13. At face value, it feels obvious. One is all blood and roses, the other is the resistance. But here's the real question. Now that we've seen how both systems work, which kind of control are you personally more willing to live under? Because that part matters, not just for world-building trivia, but for how you read Katniss, Coin, and the ending. Think about the trade. In the capital, if you're part of the pampered class, you get comfort, color, endless food, and a promise that the games will never touch you directly. Your relationship to violence is distant, televised, almost a party game. In 13, you get rations, grey walls, strict schedules, and the constant reminder that you could die in a bombing drill. But you also get the story that you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. So what do you value more? Comfort or autonomy? Visible cruelty or invisible pressure? In the capital, the violence is spectacular and honest in a twisted way. Everyone knows the arena is evil. They just choose not to care. In District 13, the violence is strategic and often hidden. Prim's death, the hijacking of Peeta, the way Coin withholds information from Katniss, those are all moves in a game the average citizen never sees. This is where we talk about hope versus security. Snow weaponizes hope by dangling the victor's mansion and the rare mercy of a good games. Coin weaponizes security by saying, follow the schedule, obey the rules, and we'll survive. One sells you the fantasy that you might become a victor. The other sells you the comfort that no one is special, so no one is expendable, until Coin quietly decides they are. So I want you to actually pick. If you had to live out your whole life under one of these systems, which would it be? And why? Are you the person who says, give me the capital, I'll take the risk that I'm complicit if it means my family eats? Or are you saying, no, put me in 13, I'd rather be hungry and tightly controlled if it means I'm technically on the right side? Tell me where you land, and here's the twist. Explain how that choice changes your view of Katniss. Do you read her final arrow as betrayal of the revolution you would have chosen, or as the only way to protect the future you care about? There is a lot to uncover here in how we justify power when we agree with its goals. And remember, there isn't a clean, correct answer. The point isn't to prove you'd win Panem Morality Hour. It's to notice which flavor of games you instinctively tolerate more. Because in the final section, we're going to cover what it actually means to step outside that choice entirely, and whether Katniss ever really does. From Victor's village to the bunker control in every flavor. So if there isn't a clean answer, where does that leave you? Standing in the middle of Panem's three main control systems, realizing they're all playing the same game with different pieces. Start with Victor's village. At face value, it's the dream ending. A mansion, hot water, full pantries, no more reaping slips with your name on them. Your district watches you stroll past in new clothes and thinks, maybe the games are survivable. Maybe they're even winnable. But here's the real question. What is that comfort actually buying? It buys your silence, your isolation on that hill, and your transformation into a walking advertisement for obedience. The capital's version of control is louder. It's the arena, the parades, the constant reminder that snow can turn any child into a spectacle. You fear the games, but you also hope, in this twisted way, that your district might finally get a victor and those victory tours and extra grain. That part matters, because it turns terror into a lottery. The relationship between you and the capital is abuse disguised as opportunity. Then you drop into District 13 and the flavor changes again. Number neon excess, no Victor's Village mansions, just concrete, schedules, and a bunker society where every minute of your day flashes on a wall. You're not tempted with luxury, you're disciplined into usefulness. The promise here is survival. Follow the schedule, accept rationing, obey coin, and humanity might live long enough to see the capital fall. So why put Victor's Village, the capital games, and 13's bunker in the same frame? Because all three are managing the same three variables: fear, hope, and obedience. The capital weaponizes terror and spectacle. Victor's Village dangles comfort and status. District 13 uses necessity and discipline. Different aesthetics, same underlying question. How do you convince people that resistance is either impossible or pointless, or both? Katniss walks through every version and refuses to stay put. She never becomes the smiling Victor mascot Snow wants. She hides in empty houses, hunts in the woods, and openly defies the script on live television. She won't be the capital darling either. Even at her most styled, she keeps slipping in unscripted arrows of truth. And in 13, she resists Coin's control too, demanding conditions for being the Mockingjay, going off script in propo shoots, and ultimately rejecting Coin's final Hunger Games proposal in the most permanent way possible. This is where we talk about the real horror of Panem. It isn't any one place. It's the idea that power, any power, will try to turn people into pieces on a board, whether those pieces are victors, soldiers, or starving kids in a reaping square. So the question hanging over the ending is brutal. If every system is a different flavor of games, what does it actually mean to step outside the arena at all? And can anyone in Panem really do that? Because the next move Katniss makes answers that. And it doesn't just change Panem, it changes the rules of the game itself. Why District 13 was more dangerous than the capital? Final verdict. So when Katniss changes the rules of the game, we have to ask, which arena was actually worse? The capital's neon nightmare or the concrete bunker that promised to end it? Here's the real question. Where are you more owned? The place that tortures you in public, or the one that quietly rewires your entire life and calls it survival? At face value, the capital feels more evil because it's so loud about it. It turns murder into a national holiday. It builds the Hunger Games as a yearly ritual, dresses you up, parades you, and then watches you die on live television. Snow's power is theatrical. Chariots, interviews, Victor's Village, all that glitter hiding the blood. That part matters because it creates open hatred. The districts know who the enemy is. Every reaping, every cannon shot reinforces the relationship between the capital's pleasure and their pain. But the capital's cruelty has a flaw built in. Spectacle burns hot. It makes martyrs and symbols. Rue, sinner, the Mockingjay dress, those are all side effects of a system that needs you to see its violence to keep you afraid. So the reason the capital eventually cracks is that the games are too visible. You can't watch your children die for decades and not dream of burning the arena down. District 13 looks like the opposite. Number parades. No pink wigs, no televised slaughter, just grey walls, ration lines, and schedule boards. But this is where we talk about why that's more dangerous long term. 13's control is invisible, bureaucratic and justified at every turn by one word: survival. Your entire day is assigned wake, work, meals, compulsory activities until there is no unscripted you left. That isn't a season of terror, that's a permanent operating system. Instead of games, you get propaganda. Instead of stylists, you get a proper team. Coin doesn't stop using the arena. She just moves it into the edit bay. Katniss becomes a weaponized symbol on command. Peeta becomes a weaponized warning, his hijacking displayed and then contained. There is a lot to uncover here, but the core is simple. Your value to 13 is how well you perform on their screen. And Coin proves she's willing to go exactly as far as Snow. She signs off on a bombing that targets children in the capital, then uses the chaos to kill Prim and break Katniss into compliance. After the war, she proposes a symbolic final Hunger Games, using capital children reviving the exact logic she claimed to destroy. That's not a slip, that's policy. So which is worse? The capital may traumatize you faster, but District 13 is engineered to own you longer. The capital rules through horror you can point at. 13 rules through necessity you can almost agree with. That's the deeper horror. It's easier to mistake 13 for good, which makes it harder to resist and terrifyingly easy to accept. And Katniss's final choice about Coin is the moment we see whether she steps out of that system or just into a new arena with me. Let's talk in the comments, which means if you're still in the arena with me after all of that, you've basically survived a full political quarter quell. We've gone from Snow's roses to Coin's schedules, from spectacle to strategy, and you're still here tracking every move. That already tells me you're the kind of viewer who doesn't take Panem at face value. So this is where we talk about it together. Here's the real question I want to throw to you first. Was Katniss right to kill Coin in that moment on the balcony? Not cinematically satisfying, not better than Snow, but right if you were in her position, with everything you knew about 13's structure, Coin's bombing of the children, Prim, the proposed symbolic games, do you pull the trigger or do you try to force a different kind of justice? Second question, and this one always splits people. How would you have voted on that final Hunger Games for capital children? You've seen what the games did to your district. You've watched Snow's granddaughter on TV. You've heard Coin frame it as balance. Are you a yes, they need to feel it voter? A no, we break the cycle here voter? Or are you doing what Katniss does and treating the vote itself as a weapon? And if you had to choose where to live, with no secret rebellion in your back pocket, capital or 13, what's your pick and why? Do you take decadent horror with roses and televised executions, or nuclear bunker equality with schedule boards that tell you when to breathe? I'm really curious which system you think you'd survive better under, not just physically, but mentally. There is a lot to uncover here about how we read good factions in fiction. So tell me, what other stories do this? Maybe you're thinking of the Jedi Council in Star Wars, the Light Fae Courts, the Underground in Attack on Titan, or any resistance group that slowly turns into the thing it was fighting. Drop your best examples of supposedly good systems that might be just as dangerous as their villains. That part matters because we're going to cover some of those in future deep dives, and I'd rather build that list with you than pretend I spotted them all myself. If you've been enjoying pulling apart the politics of Panem this way, the relationship between hope, control, and who gets sacrificed, Hit the buttons that tell the platform you want to stay in this conversation. Think of it less as boosting a channel and more as reserving your seat in this ongoing council of very opinionated victors. And because we're not done with the games yet, next up we're heading to the other side of the arena. We're going to cover either District 2 and the Peacekeepers as the capital's loyal enforcers, or pull apart the mechanics of the Quarter Quail twists themselves and why those random rules are actually war strategy. So stick around, your reaping isn't over. Next mission briefing, where we're heading after the bunker. So where do we go once we've crawled out of District 13's bunkers and wiped the concrete dust out of our eyes? Because if this episode proved anything, it's that the games were never limited to that arena. The map of Panem is basically a control diagram, and we've only decoded one quadrant. Here's the real question. If 13 is the hidden operating system, who's actually running the hardware of oppression on the surface? That's where we're going to cover District 2 in an upcoming deep dive. The Peacekeepers' training grounds, the stone quarries, the so-called loyal district that keeps the rest in line. At face value, 2 looks stable and privileged. But why does the capital trust them with all the weapons, all the enforcement, all the brutal work the capital citizens don't want to see? That part matters because District 2 is the bridge between the capital's spectacle and 13's bunker logic. In 2, you get the career tributes who dream of becoming a victor, the peacekeepers who export fear to every other district, and the infrastructure that makes both Snow's tyranny and Coin's war possible. Once you see how 2 is structured, you start to understand the relationship between open violence and quiet, bureaucratic control. Then we're going to pivot underground again, but this time into a single office, a character study of Plutarch Heavensby as the ultimate game maker, not just in the arena, but in politics. Why does a man who designed death traps for children suddenly become the architect of a revolution? Is he freeing Panem, or just swapping one version of the games for another where he gets to write the rules? This is where we talk about systems of control as a continuum. The capital kills for spectacle. District 13 kills for strategy. Plutarch sits in the middle, turning both into programming. When he stages Propo with Katniss, or times Peeta's TV appearances, he's doing to the entire country what Seneca did to 24 tributes. There is a lot to uncover here about how hope, fear, and narrative get weaponized, and I don't want this to be a one-way briefing. What other corners of Panem do you want unpacked with this same level of detail? Do you want a full breakdown of how District 4's fishing economy feeds the games, or a moral autopsy of Coin's symbolic Hunger Games proposal using capital children? Which unanswered question about any district, any victor, any law from the Treaty of Treason is still bothering you? Think of this channel as an ongoing mission log, not isolated essays you stumble into at random. Each episode adds another piece to the board. Victor's Village, District 13, District 2, Plutarch, Coin, the Quarter Quails. We're building a full schematic of how Panem runs on control. So if you want to catch the next briefing the moment it drops, whether it's Peacekeepers, Plutarch, or something you requested, turn on notifications. That way you're not waiting for a capital broadcast to tell you what the truth is. Final pattern break. Stepping out of Panem for a second, we've spent this whole video buried in Panem's infrastructure of control. Victor's mansions, peacekeepers, propaganda reels. So here's the real question. What happens when you walk away from the screen and realize some of that logic didn't stay in the story. At face value, District 13 is the safe option, the bunker that saves you from the capital's excess and the game's horror. But this is where we talk about that District 13 logic showing up outside the ruins of Panem. Anytime someone says, to keep you safe, we just need a little more control, a new emergency law, a new camera on the corner, a new enemy you're told to fear. You don't need nuclear bunkers and grey uniforms to run the same program. You just need a crisis and a leader who promises order. So here's a tiny mission for when this video ends. For 1 week, pay attention to how leaders in your world talk about emergencies, enemies, and necessary sacrifices. It could be politicians, school administrators, corporate emails, even a fandom meltdown. Who gets framed as the threat? Who gets asked to give something up? And is there any plan for giving that power back when the emergency is over? Or does it quietly become the new normal? That part matters because District 13 always has a reason. Nuclear threat, shortages. On paper, it all sounds rational, but notice the pattern. The schedule boards that dictate every movement, the rationing, the zero tolerance for dissent. The relationship between fear and obedience is the real system we're going to cover here, and it's not unique to Panem. Now, quick pattern break. None of this means you have to stop loving the rebellion fantasy. You can still cheer when the capital's white marble burns. You can still feel that rush when a victor finally turns their weapon on the arena that made them. Enjoying that catharsis and questioning the new regime are not opposites. They're the whole point. In fact, the Hunger Games becomes richer when you let both be true. You can hate snow and still side-eye Coin. You can want the capital to fall and still flinch when Coin proposes a symbolic new games using capital children. That's the series nudging you to ask, are we ending the games or just changing who runs them? So when you're watching Panem, you're not only decoding a fictional capital and a fictional district, you're practicing. You're training your brain to notice when hope is used as leverage, when a promise of unity hides a power grab, when a leader's for the greater good speech sounds a little too rehearsed. We've been in the bunker for 90+ minutes now, tracing schedules, security, and secrets. So as we step back into the metaphorical sunlight, keep that awareness with you. Because in the next section, we're going to zoom back into Panem and ask, if both the capital and District 13 are dangerous, what does real freedom in this world even look like? Exit the bunker. Closing thoughts from Victor's village. So now that we've made it out of the bunker, here's the real question. What do we do with what we just saw? On this channel, we don't just rewatch the Hunger Games and quote the big lines. We treat Panem as a living world with a memory, a history, and a hangover after every decision. That part matters because it lets you ask why a district chooses a bunker over a ballroom, why a victor chooses a target over a quiet life, and why the capital's promise of hope always comes with fine print. At face value, District 13 and the capital couldn't be more different. One is roses and champagne, the other is concrete and ration cubes. But if you've been with us through this whole breakdown, you've seen the core takeaway. District 13 shows us that not all tyrannies wear roses. Some wear grey and call it survival. The relationship between those two systems is the real horror story because it proves the games never stay contained in one arena. This is where we talk about you for a second. If you're a returning viewer, you're one of the victors who keeps coming back to the arena of ideas, volunteering over and over to go another round with this world. You already know there is a lot to uncover here, from schedule boards to propaganda reels. And if you're new and somehow made it all the way through a video about why a timetable can be scarier than a mutt, welcome to the village. You just survived your first tour. So where do we go next? We've mapped the mansions, we've walked the tunnels, we've watched Coin and Snow use the same tools with different branding. The reason we keep returning to these questions is simple. Every time we pull on one thread, Victor housing, quarter quells, secret bunkers, we see another hidden game underneath. If you want to keep that conversation and that rebellion going, tell me in the comments which system you think you'd actually fear more day to day and why. Support, shares, and all of that signal boosting do more than help the channel. They tell the algorithm this isn't just nostalgia, it's analysis. And it means we can keep coming back to Panem, not to watch children die again, but to understand how a world builds something as quietly terrifying as a schedule that owns your every hour. Because between a poisoned rose and a schedule board covered in grey blocks, we should probably fear the one that looks boring. The rose announces itself, the board pretends it's normal. And if that's true in Panem, what does it say about the systems on our own walls, in our own pockets, right now? We're going to cover that. But that's a story for another arena.